Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this self-knowledge course. Today we are having lecture number 46 of the 50 lectures that are part of the phase A of the self-knowledge course that we have been broadcasting every week for almost a year through this page. And today we are going to talk about how to control nocturnal emissions and sexual force. This lecture is important so we advance in our path to achieve chastity. Um, so, if we know about the importance of taking care of our energy, um, this lecture is going to be very useful. This lecture is actually focused on people who want to achieve chastity. A person who doesn't have the intention of making a wise use of his energy, who has not yet understood its importance, will not find this lecture useful. But on the contrary, if we already understand that our sexual energy is the source of our power and that our possibilities of reaching enlightenment is latent there, we will find here very valuable information to never again lose our sexual energy, nor during the or as nocturnal emissions, and not during the practice of the suprasexuality with our partner, so we can achieve chastity. So let's start first explaining that the objective of this lecture will be to study some aspects that prevent us from achieving the perfect chastity. So let's explain what is chastity. Well, chastity is to appreciate and treasure the energy that we have within us, with which we can create, as we have been studying during the lectures, that with this or with our sexual energy, we can actually create the existential bodies of our being. So appreciating our energy in a perfect way leads us to understand that we must not allow or let any defect to steal from us that precious energy. That is chastity, to make a wise use of our sexual energy. It's not about not having sex, because we are not, when we are talking about chastity, we are not talking about celibacy. It's not the same at all. Chastity is actually using the sexual energy, but in a wise way. When we study this, we realize that we need our sexual energy to, let's say, climb within the path of wisdom, and thus be able to create our solar bodies with which we can become true men. That is to regenerate our physical and vital bodies. That is to create our astral, mental, and causal body, and thus be able to incarnate the human soul. So we must understand that every time we spill our sexual energy, we create. And one way we create towards the consciousness, when we make that energy go to the inside and upward. That way we create the essential bodies of the being. And in the other way, in which we commonly use our sexual energy, that is taking it to the outside and down, and that way we also create, but we create the ego. So in order to achieve perfect chastity, it is necessary to study all these things that causes to lose our energy. In the lecture number 43, we are talking about the 43. We were talking about the details of lust. That was a very interesting lecture that helped us a lot to understand what are all those defects that don't allow us to make a wise use of our energy. And today we are going to see some other aspects. And we basically lose our sexual energy through nocturnal emissions or through sexual falls. So, what is a nocturnal emission? It is the spilling or loss of the creative sexual energy when we are asleep. While the physical body rests in our bed, the astral body is actually active, and certain vibrations are transmitted from the astral body to the physical body through the silver cord. Those sensations, when we are having, let's say, an lustful dream, those sensations that we are experiencing there in the astral world travels through the silver cord to the physical body, and then we have the loss of our sexual energy. So a nocturnal emission is an involuntary exit of the sexual energy from our body. And the thing is that we receive during the day certain impressions or identifications. We are going to study that now. And those impressions and identifications work in our minds, and they sit there, and in the astral world they take like shape and stage, and we have an erotic dream, and that causes to have a nocturnal emission. Now, what is a sexual fall? The sexual fall is the loss of the sexual energy, but during the practice of the suprasexuality. So it occurs in couples who practice the arcane, the sexual magic, the tantrism, and they are seeking for chastity. And when making a lot of effort to achieve chastity, they lose their energy because they don't have enough control over their sexual apparatus, and they don't have enough control over their instinct and over their emotion and over their mind. And on many occasions, these sexual faults are due to lack of will, and this happens by not working on those details that are currently managing our instinctive processes. So that is a sexual fault. So now let's study the different aspects that, even when making our effort of studying the eyes of fornication that we saw in lecture number 43, and by making our best effort of balancing our centers, as we saw in lecture number 4, can lead us to lose our energy through a nocturnal emission or a sexual fall. One are the psychological aspects. We are also going to see the aspects for Black Lodge attacks. We are going to study the external aspects that can lead us to lose our energy, and the aspects directly in the practice of the suprasex. So, in relation to the psychological aspects, the first thing that we must study are the impressions, because throughout the day we receive many impressions. The impressions are received through our 5 senses. That is, that we have impressions from our vision, hearing, smell, taste, and let's say the sensual touch. Yeah. Like when we see or we hear, we smell, or we taste, or we touch something of a lustful nature, or that activate us to lust. And these impressions, what they do is that they activate our lustful defects, and they create those images or thoughts that cause later a nocturnal emission or a sexual fall. And we can actually transform all those impressions that we receive during the day, and we can only transform them when we are in a state of vigilance, when we are in a state of self-observation. because there we can actually discover how when I see something, when I hear something, when I touch something, then if I'm in that state of self-observation, I can actually become aware of that thing, that defect that is moving inside of me, that was activated because of that impression, and there I can eliminate that with the psychological death. But if we let down our guard, there's nothing that can help us to transform the impression. That is why it is so important to always be in a state of self-observation. And when we let down our guard, we become identified with that impression, and there is, let's say, the danger. And well, immediately we discover that some external impression activated our sexual center. We must immediately ask our Divine Mother to eliminate the psychological defect that moved inside us thanks to that impression. For example, I see, let's say, a body that reaches like my prototype. Immediately I see how looking at that body activated my sexual energy. I immediately self-observe. Yeah, I discovered the defect and I ask my Divine Mother to eliminate that defect. Or let's say that someone tells me that I am looking pretty, and I see how something moves in me, and I see how my sexual energy is activated. I judge that inside of me, and I ask my Divine Mother to eliminate that, so that impression don't become into a identification inside of me. Or I hear a person moaning, or I see a person, let's say, licking their lips. That activates my sexual energy. I immediately ask my Divine Mother to eliminate that. That way, I don't let myself be like impressed by that, and I don't let myself to become identified with that situation. If we don't work these impressions, they are kept in our minds and are taken for our defects to identify us in the astral world, but with the aggravating factor that in the astral world we don't have our personality. So here I look at that person, let's say, out of the corner of my eye, but in the astral world, as there is no personality, I will go and I will jump towards that person, and even I will go and fornicate. So these impressions, so it's important to work on all these impressions to avoid the nocturnal emissions, but also to avoid the sexual falls, because if we don't work them, when we go to the practice of the suprasexuality with our partner, as we become identified with that things, they are going to return to our minds when we are practicing the suprasexuality, leading us to lose the concentration and to become overexcited and to reach the orgasm or the ejaculation. And in addition, if we fall into identification with these impressions and allow our sexual energy to enter into activity during the day, when we go to practice the super sex, the energy as was like activated the whole day, at that time is going to be like very heavy. So it's going to be very difficult to make that energy to, ascend through our spine. So it is important that we take care not to feed our minds with negative impressions. All the impressions that are not transformed can result in a nocturnal emission or in a sexual fall. Now, the second point of the psychological aspects are the identifications. That is when we let the impressions to enter, and we don't work on the impressions, we just let them come, and we feed it, and we feel like excited because it stayed in one of our centers. Can be in our emotion, can be in our mind, can be directly in our sexual center, etc. So identifications comes when we identify ourselves with the impressions. That is when we become identified and when we give attention, time, and energy to a defect. So we are during the day identified with lots of things. You will see for yourself, for example, that one can become identified with the process of anger, with the process of loss, with the process of greed. So we lose our state of self-observation and we enter into the scene, we enter into the process that is there, and we forget about ourselves and we become identified with the defect. And the identifications can result also in nocturnal emissions and in sexual faults. So if one receives, let's say, for example, a visual impression, and in that moment we work on that impression asking for death, then there is no identification. So that is how we are going to avoid that second point. The third one is the lasciviousness. Lasciviousness is the desire that is produced from sexual frustration. From lasciviousness, many acts of lust and sexual desires are awakened with any person that we see. And the problem is that unconsciously we will attempt to make these fantasies a reality in our erotic dreams. So the person who wants to work on his chastity must not let impression center and must not let them to feed our lewdness and our lasciviousness. The person gets excited and uses mechanical imagination to, let's say, imagine a scene with a person in which he or her is doing us whatever we want. That is what we do in our imagination. And this is going to feed all the defects of lust within us, and thus is going to put our sexual energy into activity, having as a result that later we will have a fall or a emission. The fourth aspect of the psychological ones are the lustful details, like we saw in lecture number 43. So these are all the lustful details that are manifested in our daily lives. Sometimes they are small details that we don't give much importance to, but they are also going to feed the lust. A simple example could be when we are flirting with another person. And in this simple situation, these so simple situations, if we observe, many details of lust are manifested in all the centers, which are what lead us to fornication. If we study them, as we learned in lecture number 43, and we eliminate them, we will make great progresses in achieving chastity. And now, let's see the aspects for the Black Lodge attacks. So there is another factor that can cause the loss of the creative sexual energy, and these are the attacks from witches. Yes, this is true. A witch can try to steal our sexual energy during the night from the fourth dimension, and that produces in the physical plane the spilling of the sexual energy. Witches are entities that want to steal energy to have powers, as they don't save their own, as it would require to deny their desires, and they are not going to do that. So witches get their powers when they steal energy from others. They actually don't look for fornicators, but they are going to look for those who are saving their energy. So this is the most commonly cause for the sleep paralysis, because they look for the person to become excited, aroused, and to lose the sexual energy, or they look for the person to be they look to scare the person, because that way people will also expel energy through their emotions. So if we don't allow ourselves to become identified with that situation, they cannot steal our energy. And also, if we are practicing the supersexuality without previously making the closing with the magic circle of protection, they can attack us to have a sexual fall and feed from that energy from the fourth dimension. Another aspect of the blood lush attacks are received when we are sleeping in the astral plane, like when we are dreaming and suddenly an attractive person appears seeking to sexually exciting us and thus leading us to lose our sexual energy. These attacks are made by the Black Lodge, which implies that we should always do the conjuration of the Belilin and the magic circle when we go to sleep. Now, how can we defend ourselves from witch who wants to steal our energy? When we feel that there are witches around and that are commonly trying to steal our energy, what can we do? What we can do is that we can place a pair of steel scissors in the form of a cross, as you can see here, inside a circle made of black mustard seeds. And we are going to ask our interior father to order the elemental intercessor to talk to the elemental of the mustard and thus ask him to help us trap the witch. And with the three fingers, like this, in the right hand, we make 3 circles while we mantralize the mantra S, like S. And thus, we make the 3 circles, and thus that mustard is like ritualized. And the mustard element, what it's going to do is that it's going to cut the link that is made by the witch, and is going to bring her to the 3rd dimension. It is also important, it is important to always make the Belilin conjuration and the magic circle every time that we are going to do a practice, and every time that we are going to practice a supersexuality, and every time that we are going to sleep. That is very important. We taught that conjurations in lecture number 7, that is here recorded in the video sections of the page. And there you have this very powerful protection, that is the scissors with the black mustard. But also it is important to learn the Jupiter conjuration that we taught also in the lecture number 7, because with the Jupiter conjuration you can defend yourself in the astral plane from any attack of the blood lodge. And let's now see the external aspects that can lead us to the loss of our energy. The first one is, and the most important one of the external aspects, is the issue of food. As there are certain foods that we must avoid, as they damage our sexual energy and they lead us to lose it. And so we must avoid, if we want to achieve chastity, food that contains pork, which has effects that can last up to 15 days in the body. We must avoid foods that were cooked in anything that pork has been cooked in. So we need to understand that the pork meat rot the sexual creative energy. The cells of the pig are in a strong involutionary process, and we must know that our energy is above everything, so we need to take care of it. And another thing that we are going to avoid is eating fish without scales, catfish or bottom feeders that eat fecal matter. Also, we are going to avoid eating farmed raised fish that were fed with pork-based feeds and steroids. We are going to also avoid toxic foods, and we are going to avoid all cold cuts and deli meats. Also, all types of liquors because they impede chastity, as we saw in lecture number 14 when we talk about the drugs and the alcoholism. So it is important to eat fresh foods. Any of the ones that I mentioned can cause nocturnal emission or sexual falls. Another external aspect that is important to study is the level of the cup. We all have a cup where our creative sexual energy is like deposit every day. And we will notice that we feel like the most sexually aroused when the level of that cup is full or more than halfway full. So anything at that point can like provoke us into sexual activity because it is like something instinctive. And this only goes to show the need to learn how to manage the level of energy of our body. So you all know very well that if it is full, it will spill. So when someone has the level of the cup very high and have no one with whom to transmute the energy, or has a partner but for whichever reason the partner cannot practice because he's sick or is passing the menstrual period or is pregnant or whatever, what needs to be done so that the energy doesn't spill over is that we must learn to sublimate our sexual energy. And what is sublimating our energy? It is learning to seminate the brain by means of a respiratory exercise that is called the pranayama, where we will imagine our spine and our brain, and we will sublimate the energy by those two ganglionic channels known as Ida and Pingala that you can see here that like go around the spine. And there we will imagine our sexual glands and our nose. And what is important is that we use our imagination in this exercise to make our sexual energy to ascend through these two ganglionic channels. That is the way. And on one side we find Ida, and on the other side we find Pingala. These are like two serpents that allow the energy to be sublimated through the vital body while we are doing the respiratory exercise and using the mantra Ham Sa. Ham is going we are going to mentalize the Ham mentally while we are inhaling the air and imagining how the energy comes from those channels going up until reaching our brain, and we are going to exhale short like sa, and we are going to imagine how that energy goes to our heart. It is a very simple procedure. So what you are going to do is that you are going to inhale while menstrualizing mentally the hem slowly. It can take 20 seconds long, that inhalation. You are going to inhale with the hem, and you are going to imagine how at the same time that energy comes, cross in the instinctive center, cross again in the inferior intellectual center here at the point of the heart, cross here in the motor center, and comes to this point in our superior emotional center. And there we are going to exhale the energy with the air with the sa. And we are going to imagine that we send that energy to our heart. You can also do it one by one. You can first, for example, do in the case of the man, the rise the arise of the energy from the right testicle, let's say. And if you want to do it one by one, what you have to do is that you are going to close your left nostril, sorry, in the case of the man. In the case of the woman, it starts in the opposite side, the right nostril. And you are going to imagine that if you for example, close your left nostril, you are going to imagine that the energy comes from the left testicle and is rising there when you inhale, and while you menstrualize the hem, you imagine how that energy comes from the right testicle, cross the instinctive center, the lower intellectual center, the motor center, and comes here from the nose, arrive to the brain, and exhale with the sa. Then you cover the right one and you imagine how it's coming up all the way here. If you have if it is easy for you to imagine, you can do both at the time, or you can do one by one. And with this exercise, what you are doing is that you are taking all that sexual energy and you are bringing it to your brain. This exercise is actually rejuvenating and helps in many health issues. What is important to know is that sublimation should only be done once a day for a maximum of 10 minutes. And the ideal hours for sublimation are between 4 and 6 in the morning, when one is waking up and the vital body has replenished the energy in the physical body. That is the perfect time. And actually there's nothing else that is required. As you practice it, you will realize how simple but extremely helpful is this practice of sublimation of energy. Another external aspect that is important to study are the environments and the larvae, as there are many places that we visit that even though we see them clean, they are actually full of energetic larvae. Like theaters, like cemeteries, like brothels, like strip clubs, like models, hotels, dance clubs, churches, erotic movie theaters, etc. So you can, for example, go to a hotel and you can see that the bed is perfectly clean. But when you see that place internally or clairvoyantly, you see how it is full of larvae. So we must avoid those places, and especially the cemeteries, because they are places where there are decomposing bodies, and they are places that we should always avoid because they are full of larvae. And when we go to these places, any of these places, those larvae latch onto our vital body, sucking out our energy. And if we need to go to any of these places because we have to go, what we must do is that we can put a pinch of sulfur in our shoes. And this can prevent the larvae from entering through the feet into our bodies and go and impregnating our homes from larvae. And if we, for any reason, we went there and we have, or we see, like for example in the astral, or we are afraid that our place have larvae, what we must do is to clean ourselves and to clean our space with the swastika practice. And it is done by burning sulfur with alcohol on a tile. What we are going to do is that we're going to make in a tile this figure of the cross in movement, which is the swastika, that means or symbolizes the sexual force for the awakening of consciousness when it's done to the right, not to the left, like is the Nazi one. And we make the figure, as you see here, with sulfur on a tile, and we ritualize the sulfur, asking our Father that if it's His will, to order our elemental intercessor to visualize the elemental of sulfur, to ask him to cleanse this place of any type of negative energy or larva that can be there. And we ask elemental intercessor, elemental intercessor, elemental intercessor, do your work in the name of Christ, by the majesty of Christ, by the power of Christ. And we do the same, the mantra S 3 times. And there we already realized the elemental of the sulfur. And we are going to apply ethyl alcohol to the sulfur, and we are going to light it on fire. And we are going to let that to cleanse the space. We need to avoid inhaling the smoke. So once we make it and we light it on fire, what we do is that we can, like for example, jump 3 times. So we clean ourselves and we go outside and we let the sulfur to clean all the space from the larvae. Another aspect, external one, that I want to show you today is the aspect of the menstruation. Sorry, that is wrong here. And we know that menstruation is a natural process for the woman who is not working on herself. It is just a biological process. But when the woman is working on the psychological death, it also helps her to remove from her body the remains of the defects that have been eliminated during the month. Both from her and from the couple, since the woman is like the cremation oven where the shells of the defects are incinerated. So during the menstrual process, it is recommended that the woman sleep apart from the man from the following reasons. The energy of the woman during that period is passing through a process of involution, and this energy pulls the energy of the man towards involution as well. And on the other hand, the menstruation of a woman produces many larvae, and for this reason it is not advisable to sleep in the same bed where suprasex is practiced, nor should the man sleep with the woman during those days. In addition, any caressing during this week can revive that psychological eyes. And an important warning here for the woman is do not wet her head, her spine, or her sexual organ during those days. So women shouldn't bathe during those days, but making local baths with a wet cloth. And if woman bathes, what she does is that she generates fibroids and cysts and sexual coldness. And it is important to know that the menstrual process lasts 7 days. No matter that the bleeding lasts fewer days, it's always 7 days. So during these 7 days, the woman shouldn't wash her hair or bathe directly and not sleep in the same bed where she practices supersex with her partner. Now, the aspects in the practice of supersex. The first one is the lack of concentration. We know that we must always ask when we are going to practice for the assistance of our Father and our Divine Mother before beginning the practice of sex. And that we should never practice without previously doing the conjuration of the Belilin and the magic circle, because if not, we are exposed to attacks. And what we need to know is that we must control the mind all the way during the practice to have a good concentration during the sexual practice. The lack of concentration in the practice is the cause of sexual faults. They happen because we allow the mind to wander. And we need to know that our consciousness is where our concentration is. So we must concentrate on the rise of the energy to the points between the eyebrows through our spine. Sorry. When practicing, one should concentrate on our sexual glands and our spine, not on our partner's body or our partner's sexual organs. And we must know that all the movements that we are going to do during the practice should be gentle. So we must avoid harsh or quick movements. And all the time during the practice, we must be like living the present moment there with our concentration there, not letting our mind go imagining things, worrying about things, because we are going to lose the concentration. And another thing is that the bedroom should be maintained in a perfect hygienic conditions with good ventilation. And it is recommended that the couple doesn't use old mattresses or ones that have previously used for fornication, because they are full of larvae. And for those who marry, it is recommended not to spend the honeymoon in hotels, because the beds in these hotels are black beds. Though they appear to be very clean, they are actually dens of the black lodge. And another point, and the last one, is the caresses without practice. And this is a very important point for both single people and couples. Many people are unaware that caresses put the sexual energy into activity. And this begins with even the first kiss and in the first caress. And if this energy doesn't ascend, if we are not going to the practice immediately to make it ascend towards evolution, then inevitably it must descend towards involution. And later, this person will lay down to sleep and will have a nocturnal emission, or in the practice will have a sexual fall. So it is important to keep our sexual desire for the practice of sex to have a lot of power during the practice. And well, these are all the points and aspects that I want to show you today. And it is important to take care of each one of them and to investigate also in the astral world with our inner being if we have any doubt regarding anyone. For example, when I studied that for the first time, I was like, it was hard for me to understand the menstruation aspect. And I actually asked in the astral plane, and my Divine Mother actually showed me the importance of that point. And that way, we all have the same opportunity. We all can ask internally to our inner being to show us the importance of this information, if it is good or not, if it is a reality or not, and we can actually have our own verification of this process. And well, this has been all for today. As always, I'm going to invite you to our next lecture that will be the eye of witchcraft. And in this topic, we are going to study the reason why we must understand that we all have the eye of witchcraft within our inner world, and we are going to understand the necessity to eliminate this eye from our psychology. So we are going to study all the aspects of the witchcraft, and we are going to try to observe them in ourselves so we can eliminate it. So this has been all for today. Thank you to all who watched the video, and see you in the next lecture. Ciao, ciao.